All right, so here we are. Let's get started properly now, shall we? Now that I can see I've got a couple of people actually coming onto the correct live stream. My name is Narissa. I'm a travel blogger and backpacker on nomadgirltales.com. And today I want to talk about getting lonely when you're traveling alone. I can see Lillian on the chat. Hi, Lillian. Welcome. And hi, Edgar. Right, so I like traveling alone. I prefer traveling alone. If you give me a choice between traveling with a friend, friends, or family, or by myself, I will choose traveling alone. Can seem quite strange, but it had to start somewhere. So like we said, people have a lot of nerves at the thought of going backpacking or traveling on their own. Security, emotional, what's it going to be like? So I just like to tackle that today. And I find the first time I ever traveled alone was to Mexico in 2013, which I talked about in my last show about my first time ever backpacking. And what was it like? I was quite, I was honestly nervous and excited at this idea of wandering a foreign country on my own for a month. And at the time, that seemed like quite a long period for me. Now it's short, because when you're backpacking on a budget, you can really extend your travels for a very long period of time. But for me, the idea of being alone in a foreign country where I didn't speak the language for 1 month was kind of intimidating. So one thing that I've really realized is that when you travel alone, you actually end up making a lot more friends than when you travel with other people. Because when you're with someone else, maybe locals or other travelers will, realize that, you're okay on your own. Maybe you're fine. Maybe you don't need to meet other people. But when you're on your own, it's very easy to approach someone because they're often looking for other people to talk with. So honestly, when I travel on my own, I make a lot more friends, and I have made great friends traveling alone. Another interesting thing that I found happens when you travel alone is that you take a step back from your life and your interactions with other people, because you spend a lot of time on your own, maybe sitting on the bus, walking, wherever it is, whatever it is you're doing, going and exploring an area, a town, you're literally alone a lot. And what happens when you're away from your normal life and you're alone is you end up questioning. You end up thinking a lot about your own life, your aims in life. And these are things that came up for me during my trip, my month in Mexico. I started to ask, what is it that I really want in life? You start to question what I'm doing back there. Is it really what I want to be doing? I also have grown up in the big city, in the capital of Kenya, Nairobi. And so I started to question, do I really want to live in the city, or would I rather live in the countryside, So all of these questions start to come up, and it's just giving yourself that space in a new place away from people that allows you to open up your mind to these questions. One more positive aspect of traveling alone would be that you can just make your own plans. You don't have to plan around anyone. So this can sound a little bit selfish, and maybe it is, but I'll give an example. So when I was in Mexico, I was in DF, the capital city, and it was my second last day before leaving. And I had made a plan to go to the ancient city of Teotihuacan. Well, when I woke up in the morning, I didn't feel like going anywhere. I felt sleepy, I felt lazy, and Had I been traveling with someone, I would have probably had to still force myself to go. But instead, I just said, you know what? I know I've planned everything, but I'm just going to go back to bed. So I went back to bed. And this is actually one of the beauties of traveling on your own. You can just make and cancel plans spontaneously according to how you're feeling in the moment. You don't have to go according to other people's plans, however selfish that might sound. That being said, I can see Ola has come onto the call. Hello, Ola. Welcome. And I was just talking about some of the benefits of traveling alone. And on the other hand, honestly, when you're on your own for a month or months on end, yeah, it can get a bit lonely. And for me, this often manifests when I see other groups of people. Perhaps I see a group of friends, or I would see families, or I'd see a couple, and then I'm just there on my own and I don't know anyone. And yeah, it feels a little lonely, and it does sting a little bit. But I think the pros might outweigh the cons, as we'll talk about. Another thing that came up for me, specifically in Mexico, was the language barrier. Now, when I'm traveling in a country where I speak the language, you don't feel as lonely because at least you can interact with people. But in Mexico, I didn't speak Spanish. So I was really isolated from people. And also because I traveled to quite remote areas. And when you can't communicate with people, they'll smile and you'll feel their love, but you can't talk. So yeah, it does get quite lonely. I remember being in a small village in the hills in the southwest of Mexico. I couldn't speak to anyone. I had a Spanish-speaking guide. Everyone in the village spoke Spanish. I didn't understand what everyone was saying. And so I just went and sat in my little cabana and felt really lonely. And then when the moon came out, I howled at the moon. That was my company for the night. So I'd actually like to read to you a little thing from my diary. This is my diary from when I went backpacking. I read a little bit from it last time on the show last week. And by the way, whoever is watching, feel free to comment in the chat box any questions or comments you might have about backpacking in general, or about the topic of loneliness while traveling. So over here, I had just arrived in Mexico. I think I'd been there maybe a week, and I was starting to enjoy this feeling of being alone. First time I'd ever done it. So this is what I wrote. I think I'm learning to live more and more in the moment, slowly coming to terms with life's transience, fully loving and appreciating everything about now, which is so beautiful. So this is very interesting because now, how many years later is it now? It's 7 years later that we're talking. And it's a very meditative statement that I just made. And over the years, I've come to realize that this is one of the reasons I love backpacking, and especially backpacking alone. It brings me so fully into the present moment, into the peace. And when I'm alone, I'm very much in that state. And there's one experience that I also want to share with you from my diary. So this is from 10th of January, 2014. And it was my last day on the coffee farm I was volunteering at. And this is what I wrote. It's my last day on the farm. I spent an hour in heaven, lying on a rock in the middle of the river with the sun, the river running below me, the blue sky above, the trees, the hills, the insects, and a bird. I was so filled with joy. I laughed, sang, and danced on the rocks. That was all on my own. No one else was with me on this river. Had I been with other people, I would have probably been chatting with them. I probably wouldn't have noticed, the insects, the bird that came to greet me. I'm not sure if I would have been too self-conscious to dance around on the rocks, but because I was alone, I was able to be so fully in my element. I just thought I'd share that with you. I have a question from Ulla saying, how old were you when you went backpacking in Mexico, and how were you able to do so? How old was I? That's a good question. I was 22, 23. I was around 22 or 23. Yeah. And I'm not sure about the second part of your question. Maybe you can elaborate on how I was able to do so. Or I did actually talk about this in my previous episode. Basically, I was actually in San Diego in California, and then I just crossed the border and came down from there. And I did a lot of volunteering on farms in exchange for accommodation and food. So this is something I did also talk about in the previous episode about what is woofing, this exchange on organic farms. So there's another thing I'd like to read to you from my diary. I wrote here, more reasons I'm enjoying traveling solo. I form my own impressions of things, have my own reactions without the influence of someone else. So this is actually one of the prime reasons I like traveling alone. When I walk into a new place, like maybe I've just gotten off the bus in a town that I've never been to before, and there's no one else with me, my experience is so pure. It's so raw, you know? Or if I go and watch a show, for example, in Mexico, there were a lot of cultural shows that were happening all the time, festivals. And when I go on my own, it's so funny because you're not speaking with anyone else, so you're not getting their thoughts. And it's just a pure experience. And there's no words to it. Yeah, I'm not sure if that makes sense, but yeah. And then I also said that I'm learning to love my own company. So there was a lot of growth going on. And I also talked about meeting a lot of new people and learning from them. So these are some of the pros of traveling alone. But back to the difficult side. I wrote this, would you believe I was in Mexico for a month, but I didn't feel lonely until 5 days before I left Mexico. Because when you're traveling, when you're backpacking specifically, you meet a lot of people. You meet other backpackers, you meet locals, and it's very different from luxury travel, where you're often isolated in a hotel room. And this is why I actually much prefer backpacking. So now, 5 days before I left the country, I decided to go hiking in the southwest of Mexico in the Sierra Norte mountains. And this is where I felt lonely because it was a very rural area and there was nobody who spoke English here. So what I wrote was, today would be my first hint of loneliness this trip. Such hiking trips are way better with company. 1 month is a good amount of time to travel solo for me. I'm looking forward to seeing my boyfriend in 5 days when I'll be able to spend quality time exploring nature with someone I really know and care about. Now, this is interesting because first of all, at this moment, I said that 1 month is enough to travel alone, but this has changed. My new perfect amount of time to backpack alone is 3 months. By the time 3 months hit, I am craving to come back home to Nairobi, Kenya. Yeah. And I also talked about how I missed being with people that care about me. Now, one of the beauties of backpacking, backpacking solo, like I mentioned, is that you get to meet all kinds of people, connect with them, travel with them, have experiences with them. And to be honest, you're never actually alone. However, the part that gets lonely after a while is that you don't actually know these people that well. And there's something that you end up missing in terms of someone who really has known you for a while, like an old friend or your family, someone who really knows, cares about you and loves you, you know? You meet beautiful souls, but there's something about that familiarity that hits after a while. So in that diary entry, I then wrote, "Nothing but Spanish here. My head hurts." So this was another issue that I really faced. And when I went back to backpack more in South America in 2017, this time I was there for 4 months straight. I made sure that I learned Spanish so that I could actually communicate with people. So when I went to Colombia in 2017, the first thing I did was to take Spanish classes in the country so that at least I could communicate with people. And to be honest, by the time I was leaving South America 4 months later, I could communicate in basic Spanish. Great. So I'd like to share one last extract from my diary, a really beautiful experience I had. But before I continue, if there are any questions that you might have about, backpacking in general, the experience of specifically backpacking alone, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I will be getting on with the final reading for today. All right. So this was written on 13th of January, 2014. It was actually my sister's birthday. I couldn't contact her. I didn't have any way of contacting her. I just blew her kisses over the forest. So it's morning, and I was up in time for sunrise. I watched the reincarnation of the sun from 6:45 to 7:30 a.m. His full glory began at exactly 7:15, one of my few sunrises. Okay, that's changed. I've watched a lot more sunrises now. And also something perfect to experience alone, with no other people or their sounds or their influence on your thoughts, just the pure experience. I heard all kinds of bizarre bird sounds and saw their various colors, yellow, bright blue. As soon as I sat down, I heard a coyote howling in the distance. It was so tranquil. I heard a tiny grasshopper jump from one blade of grass to another, and heard the whipping sound of a bird's wings pushing the air up and down as it flew. Down in the pueblo means town, some cockerels crowed, a donkey hee-hawed, and a dog barked. I saw some light on some trees on a distant hill. The sky got brighter at a point behind a hill, until suddenly the bright sun slowly showed his face. The warm light gradually spread round the hills until it finally hit my face and temporarily blinded me, simultaneously warming my sleepy muscles into a happy smile. At this angle of light, glistening spider webs in the grass in front of me lit up. The sun's light washed over the hills and valleys, and I counted 16 distinct rays. Some hummingbirds with long pointed beaks and green circles on their chest whirred me a good morning, and we, together with the awakened flitting insects, soaked up the tingly heat of the morning sun. Now that was the experience of a sunrise watched alone. Yeah, and that brings me to the end of my readings for today and sharings about the experience of traveling alone, the experience of loneliness, the joys of traveling alone. So I'll just wait a minute in case anyone that's on the chat on the show wants to type in a message, say hi, ask a question, and I'll just show you a little grasshopper. Since I was just reading to you about the grasshoppers, this is a beautiful grasshopper that I got in Mexico. It's on display on my windowsill till date. Yeah, and I'm not breaking it, don't worry. You can take it apart like this. Okay, this other one's not coming off. But yeah, they make these beautiful, beautiful painted items. I also have a cat, which I don't have with me right now. So amazing. I remember when I went to Mexico, I didn't buy any of the items that were for the Day of the Dead. I think how do you say it? Dia de Muerte. Okay, my Spanish is not up to par right now. But now, when I ever go back, I will be buying those because I'm all about exploring, what the afterlife is about. I have some comments here from Ola. I do sunrises alone for the past month. It's true. This quarantine, staying home thing has actually forced us to do a lot of time alone. So maybe in some ways we're able to experience these things without even having to travel anywhere. And you do this with a cup of cocoa, meditating and journaling. That is beautiful. That is absolutely beautiful. I also notice when I wake up in the mornings, I just feel the sun rays on my face. When I meditate, I notice the dust dancing in the sunlight. It's all these little things that we notice when we're alone. All right, so I think we're coming to the end of today's show. The topic was lonely in Mexico. And in conclusion, if you haven't already, the subscribe button is here. Here. I think I'm pointing at the correct side of the screen this time. Last time I pointed on the opposite side because the camera switches. So here, there's a subscribe button, and next to it, there's a bell so that you can be notified when I post or go live. And on the homepage of my YouTube channel, there is a donation button on the banner in case you want to support more content creation. I'm always up for ideas and collaboration. Apart from that, I will see you next week. Next Friday, same time, 3:30 p.m. GMT, 5:30 p.m. East Africa time. Mark your calendars, invite your friends who you think might be interested, and I am very up for suggestions for topics or any other ideas. So on that note, Edgar is saying that I got the pointing in the right direction today. I'm glad. So on that note, I wish you all a lovely Friday evening, a lovely weekend, and here is my fire. Have a good one. Lots of love and bye-bye.